Hey guys, my name is Daniel, and today I'm going to be unboxing these PC parts and showing you guys how to put them together. To start off, this video is not sponsored by any of the brands you see here today. I simply chose these parts based on personal preference and for the type of PC that I would be building, which is a mid-level gaming/video editing PC. Just because you might not have the same parts that you see here does not mean you have to go through a completely different installation guide. Most builds have the same installation concept. Therefore, you do not have to buy the same parts you see here. However, the parts that you do choose must be compatible with each other and must fit the requirements for the type of PC that you are building. For example, if you are building your PC for, let's say, gaming or video editing like we are, you would offer a high-end video card and a high-end CPU. However, if you're using your PC to, let's say, browse the internet, send emails, or just for basic schoolwork needs, you can opt for going for a low-end video card and a low-end CPU. In this video, I'll first be showing you guys an overview of the parts I chose and why I chose them. Next, I'll be showing you guys the actual hardware installation of this PC. Then, I'll be showing you guys the wiring, where everything's supposed to plug into and all that. And finally, I'll be going over cable management. That's making your case look neat, stuffing all those wires in the back of your case, but at the same time not making it all jumbled up. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Now the first part we have here is the CPU, also known as the Central Processing Unit, also known as the brains of your computer. Now for the CPU, I went with the Ryzen 5 3600 6-core 12-thread processor. Even though the Ryzen 5 is a bit of an older model CPU, it is basically equivalent in specs when compared to the Intel i5, and it is even up to par with the Intel i7. With this CPU being fantastic for video editing and gaming, it bringing up to $178, it made it almost a no-brainer for me to use this CPU when building the type of PC I am. If you were looking to build a higher-end PC on the other hand, I would suggest going for a higher spec CPU, which has more clock speeds. This entails brands such as the Ryzen 9 or the Intel i9. So, because the CPU is the brains of your computer, it has to be bulky, because that's to store the information, telling your components what to do, and all that. So, here we have the CPU. Psych, that's the wrong box. Now this is the CPU. This boy right here is what tells all the components in your PC what to do. Now time for the RAM. For the RAM, I went with the Corsair Vengeance 2-pack 8GB DDR4 sticks, which sums up to a total of 16GB. I decided to go with the white RAM sticks because they add a bit of contrast to our motherboard and case, spicing things up a little bit in our design. The RAM is more of a straightforward part to go for when building your PC. As long as you're getting the right amount of memory speeds and the right amount of gigabytes to suit your needs, any brand that you would go for would most likely be reliable. The most popular brands out there, however, would be Corsair, HyperX, or Viper. However, there are many other brands out there to go for. I went for Corsair based on personal preference, and I went with 16GB because since today we're building a mid-level gaming/video editing PC, there's not much need in going any higher than that, or even any lower than that. 16GB in general is a good amount to go for when building mid-level, low-end, and even some higher-end PCs. These RAM sticks came to a total of about $70. Now for the storage, I went with the SSD M.2 NVMe with 1TB of storage. This SSD is really good for storing and loading games fast, and likewise when it comes to photo and video editing. I went with this SSD because the M.2 slots are a bit faster than the SATA ports, and there's less cable management, so it just makes our case look a lot neater. This SSD came to roughly $135. So for the case, we decided to go with the NZXT mid-tower case because it looks very sturdy, clean and simple, yet a little fancy at the same time. The case that you get is mainly personal preference. As long as your case can hold your motherboard, any case that you would go for will most likely be reliable. Some things to keep in mind, however, are how many fan bays your case has, how many fans has pre-installed, and if you would like as much airflow as possible, you should go for a bigger case or for a case that has a good cable management system. For example, our case here comes with 4 fan bays, one at the top, one in the rear, and 2 in the front here. And also it comes with a really good cable management system at the back here. We'll get more in depth into the cable management system when we actually manage the cables at the end of the installation part, but it's very neat, nice, you know, just hides all the cables at the back of the case. Another incentive for me to buy this case as well was the affordable cost of $70, so it was really good for my budget. Now for the graphics card, I remember the Asus 1660 Super GeForce GTX. As I said in the beginning of this video, the graphics card is a very essential component when looking to build a game and such video editing PC. This is because the video card is what allows the monitor to produce fast action sequences, which are necessary for the vivid colors and sharp lines of computerized flash apps and games. The more frames per second, the smoother motion that appears on your screen. So in simpler terms, the graphics card is what basically brings your graphics to life in gaming and video editing. This is a splendid GPU for its price and supplies optimum resolution to support our needs. So with that, I ended up buying this GPU for $230. Here we have an extra case fan. This is a bit of an optional part, but I decided to get it because I didn't have any lights in my case and I also needed extra cooling. It is recommended to have at least 3 fans in your case. So if your case comes with like 2 fans like our one does, you should probably opt for getting like at least 1 more fan in your case. This fan is the Corsair LED 140mm and lights up red. This fan came to roughly $25. So guys, we have all our ports ready, but what are we going to use to power them? That's right, with our power supply. For this power supply, we went with the Seasonic 80 Plus Gold Certified 650 watt fully modular. Anything above 500 watts would be ideal for this type of build, or any build in general. However, if you want to go for a lower wattage than we have here, that's totally acceptable. Also, this power supply is 80 Plus Gold Certified, meaning we won't be having to break the bank, and it is very energy efficient. Finally, this PC is fully modular, which means we won't be having any cables just dangling around our case, making our case look untidy, not too fresh. You'll understand a little more what I mean about fully modular in the actual hardware installation part. This power supply came to a total of $119. Okay guys, before we actually get into installing things into our case, first I'm going to show you guys a quick breakthrough of what our case comes with. This is the HD audio cable, and this is what allows the headphone jack on your case to function. Next up, we have the USB 3.1 Gen 1 cable, and this is what allows the USB port on your PC to work. The front panel connectors are what ensures the power and reset switch, and the power and HDD LED lights are all running smoothly. This is the USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-C cable. However, we do not have this port on our motherboard, so we are not going to be using this cable today. And finally, we have your fan cables. These cables are what transfers the power from your motherboard to your fans. Most cases should come with a box or bag of screws, extra cables, and a manual on where to place your parts. These are the screws that came in our case. Sometimes you are not going to be using all of them, so take a look at your manual and see which screws are necessary and which aren't. Okay guys, the first part that we're going to be using is the power supply unit. Before we actually get into installing this into our case, I'm going to show you guys a quick overview and unboxing of the power supply unit. Here we have the installation guide. You guys won't be needing this because you got me here, so go put that to the side. Next we have some zip ties and some Velcro straps. These are going to come in very useful when it comes to actual installation process. And also, if you can see at the bottom here, we have some screws. These are going to be used for actually installing our power supply unit into our case. So you're going to have to keep these to the side but not too far. Okay, now for our actual power supply unit. So this is our power supply unit. It's very heavy duty, as you can see here. And also, back to what I was saying about the introduction, you can see we have no cables already pre-attached to our power supply unit. That's because we went with the fully modular. So we decide what cables that we want to go into our power supply unit, avoiding any cables that we don't want to use, and making it our case look untidy, like I said. So we can put that to the side. Here we have the power cable. This end is gonna plug into the power supply unit, and this end is gonna plug into the wall. So you can put that. And these are just our cables that we're going to be using to plug into our power supply unit.
This is the 24-pin connector and is what supplies power to your motherboard. This is the 4+4 CPU connector, and this is what supplies your CPU with power. Now we have the PCIe cable, which also supplies extra wattage directly to your graphics card. Now that we have all of our cables in our power supply, we're going to install it into our case. Majority of the time, your power supply fan is going to face downwards towards your dust filter, and your connectors and switches are going to be facing outwards of your case. Now we're going to get the screws that came with your power supply unit and make sure your power supply unit screw holes are aligned with the screw holes on your case. When installing your power supply unit and every other component after this, we are going to be using a normal store point screwdriver. When screwing in your power supply unit, it is important to screw diagonally with your hand first and then tighten with the screwdriver. Okay, now we're going to be adding in our extra case fan. The NZXT H510 comes with a panel in front of our case that holds any extra case fans we want to add. So we're going to go ahead and remove this panel first. As you can see, our extra fan comes with a cable that we are going to use to plug directly into our motherboard. This is what's going to give our fan power. Next up, all we're going to do is screw in our extra case fan into our panel using the screws that came with our case fan's box. And finally, we're going to place our panel that now holds our extra case fan into its appropriate spot and screw it back in with the thumb screws. And now it's time for the real fun. Time to take on the motherboard. The first thing that comes in our motherboard box are some SATA cables. Next up, we have a CD that contains the drivers for your PC. However, we do not have a CD port on our PC, and most of the times the drivers are outdated anyway. This is our motherboard manual, and it contains information on where everything is located and supposed to plug into your motherboard. And finally, we have these very small screws that are going to be used to install our M.2 storage device. At first glance, you might be like, whoa, what's going on here? What's all this stuff here? But you'll see, as we go along, it's not all that bizarre. First, we'll be installing our CPU onto the motherboard. When holding the CPU, it is very important to hold it by the sides and not by these very delicate gold bits on the bottom. And even though it's not as big of a deal, you still shouldn't touch the top of it either. When installing your CPU, it is important to line up the arrow on your CPU with the arrow on the slot. Before you install the CPU, you must lift the lever next to the slot. There is no need to apply pressure to the CPU. You will see that it just falls right into spot. After you install the CPU, lower the lever and lock it right into place. And just like that, our CPU has been installed. Now it's time to install our CPU cooler. Before we add a cooler to our CPU, we must first remove the brackets located on both sides of our CPU. After you screw off the brackets, do not lift the motherboard up, because there's a tension plate underneath it that keeps our cooler stationary and secure. When holding your cooler, you're going to want to ensure you are not touching the thermal paste on the bottom. This is what also keeps your CPU at cool temperatures. When attaching this cooler, there are only two possible places that you can orient your fan due to the rectangular shape of the cooler and the slot. I chose to have the sign on the left, however, for the main reason that the wire was closer to the port that way. Just like what we did with the power supply, we are going to screw in the cooler in a diagonal fashion, bit by bit. A simple trick that hides your CPU cooler cable is to slightly knot it and tuck it next to your cooler. Next up is the RAM. When holding your RAM sticks, hold it from the top part and not by these gold bits at the bottom. Before installing the RAM sticks, push down on the sides of the RAM slot. Sometimes only one is necessary to be pushed down. However, sometimes both sides must be pushed down. Because we are using two RAM sticks, we are going to be occupying the second and fourth slots as depicted on our motherboard. When attaching your RAM sticks to the slot, there is only one way to put them in, due to one section of the go bits being larger than the other section. Gently line up the stick with the slot and apply even pressure on both sides. Before we put our motherboard into the case, we still have one more part to attach, and that's our storage device. We're going to be using the screws that were found in our motherboard box to attach our storage device. Just like the other parts, you are going to want to hold the storage device by the side and not by those go bits. When attaching your M.2 SSD, locate the M.2 slot on your motherboard. Most M.2 SSDs are the standard 80mm or 60mm long. Somehow our motherboard guessed we were going for the 80mm because there was already a standoff for us. Gently insert the SSD at a 45-degree angle and apply pressure. You should apply back pressure as well so that your motherboard doesn't shift out of place, like what happened to me. After it is locked in, gently push the top down and screw in using those tiny screws that came with your motherboard. And as easy as that, we are more than halfway there to having ourselves a full built PC. Before we insert our motherboard in the case, we must first attach the I/O shield, which can be found in your motherboard box. Simply insert the shield from the inside of your case and push until you hear a click. When installing your motherboard into your case, you must first line up the standoffs on your case with the screw holes on your motherboard. The NZXT H510 has a label that corresponds to your size motherboard, so it's easy for us to match the holes. Hold your motherboard by the CPU cooler and lower it into your case, matching the ports with the I/O shield. Next, locate the screws that your case came with to install your motherboard and screw in a diagonal fashion. Now time for the last, but certainly not least, our graphics card. Locate the metal brackets on the back of your PC. Most of the time, the PCIe slot will line up with the second and third brackets, so you're going to want to remove those. However, some cases come with a tension plate, so you're going to want to move that first. Depending on the type of graphics card you have, your fan should be facing downwards or to the side. Majority of the time, however, the fans face downward. Before you install your graphics card, pull back the tab located on your PCIe slot and remove the protective seal from the gold bits. And as you guys probably heard me say it several times in this video, if it's gold, you don't hold. Line up the graphics card with the slot and just simply push in until you hear a click. As long as that click isn't the sound of the motherboard snapping, you have successfully installed your final part to the PC. After your graphics card has been installed, bring back the screws that were attached to the brackets and screw them back into your graphics card. The first cable that we will be connecting is the 24-pin cable. This cable is the largest out of all of them and connects to the 24-pin port, which is pretty easy to spot out and is normally located on the side of your motherboard. Next up is the 4+4 CPU connector, and both cables plug into the port called CPU power, which is most of the time located near the CPU and has an 8-pin port. Now for the PCIe cable that plugs directly into your video card, it's pretty much straightforward. As you can see, our PSU comes with two 6+2 PCIe cables. More extensive graphics cards require the 8-pin connector, and less extensive graphics cards require a 6-pin connector. However many ports your video card has available is the amount of cables that you plug in. So for our first case fan, we're going to plug it into the port that says System Fan 1. For us, it was right above our SSD. For our next case fan, we will be plugging it into where it says System Fan 2. This one was right under our graphics card. Now for our USB 3.1 Gen 1 cable. This cable plugs directly into where it says JUSB 3. This port was at the bottom right of our motherboard. The front panel cable plugs directly into the port labeled JFP1 and was located directly to the right of our USB 3.1 Gen 1 cable. And finally, our HD audio cable plugs right into the port labeled JAUD1. Your cable management is all about personal preference, so for this port you can organize your cables however you want, but this is just how we did it.
Build complete. Let's go. This is a team effort with the cameraman, video editor, and my little brother Aaron.
This was a really fun opportunity for me to build a PC and make a YouTube video with my older brother. So make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe, and stay tuned for a new build coming out very soon and other fun content.